I did not expect that married life would be so difficult, especially with Joanna. There seemed to be no end to the constant nagging and complaining. Everything I did always seemed to be wrong. Before we got together, I had many hobbies, such as outdoor activities, sports, cycling, and playing football. But over the years, Jo always found reasons why we couldn't do them anymore: financial difficulties, lack of time, or inconsistency with her other plans. I started to distance myself from my friends, skipping walks and activities. My obsession with Jo blinded me for years before I finally saw the truth. It was only when I thought about my choices that I realized how much I had sacrificed. Why marry someone for the sake of their perfection, then try to make someone else out of them? Even my loved ones were considered a problem. Jo didn't think they were smart enough. Jo's behavior was unbearable. She drank a lot, was noisy and rude. She seemed to enjoy controlling our lives and everything that happened in it. She constantly forced us to earn more money, work more, and stick to a strict list of tasks. This behavior became familiar to her. When we first started communicating, she was caring, attentive, and able to adjust. Although she was demanding at first, it didn't bother me much. I was intrigued by her. She did not want to part with her maiden name, Farrington. She was a bright woman from a wealthy family. As for me, I'm Phil Hall. Not that I'm bright or rich, but I've managed to make my life work. I had a good job, a lot of friends, and hobbies that made me happy. And then I met Jo, and everything fell into place. Joanna has always been tall, with long blonde hair, fair skin, and sophisticated English charm. Her bright blue eyes matched her lively character. She is always on the move but at the same time sharp and observant. She exudes intelligence, determination, and a subtle understanding of her influence on men, skillfully deflecting unwanted courtship. To my surprise, she took the initiative and asked me out on a date, leaving me perplexed by her interest. I couldn't understand why someone like her would choose me. After all, I wasn't like the usual rich and smug suitors who surrounded her. Now I remember that day and our conversation. She said, "You are different to me, more sincere and kind-hearted. I noticed that you often smile and joke with your friends, and it really impresses me." I warned her that calling me a nice guy was not enough reason for a romantic relationship. Ignoring my words, she laughed, looked into my eyes, and at that moment completely charmed me. Her irresistible smile took my breath away. I had to concentrate because my heart seemed about to burst out of my chest. Despite my initial skepticism, in the early hours, I decided that everything could work out as well as possible. Jo was not only genuinely pleasant to talk to but also stunningly attractive. She put a lot of effort into maintaining her appearance. She wore stylish clothes, worked out with a personal trainer, visited spas, and underwent various grooming procedures. She spared no expense in self-care, and it was noticeable. Even as she got older, she continued to look even more amazing. Our engagement was going smoothly until an unexpected meeting with an old family friend, Richard, threw our relationship into turmoil. I saw that Jo was having a drink with him, that they were having a nice conversation, and he was holding her hands over the table. At first, I thought about leaving them alone, but in the end, I decided to go over to them and sit down at the table. Jo's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly took her hands off the table. "It's not what you think," I explained to Richard. I couldn't keep seeing him because I was engaged now. "The only thing that confuses me is the way you hold hands and look at each other with love. Maybe it's just a bad time, and you didn't have a chance to end our relationship. I promise you that Richard is just a friend now. I wanted to talk to him personally to do the right thing. I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I stared at Richard, waiting for his reaction. He didn't seem eager to defend himself against my accusations. Joanna's words are true. I asked her out on a date not knowing that she was engaged. I appreciated her honesty when she explained the situation to me face to face. "I didn't want there to be any problems between you," Richard replied. His words made sense, but something made me wary. He continued, "I think it's better to leave you to deal with your problems alone. I wish you well. And one more thing, Phil, you were incredibly lucky because the chances of success were 1 in a million. You are a really happy person." Jo looked at me with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that I'm dating him," she confessed. I asked, "Are you being honest with me, Joe? If you don't need me, we need to resolve this issue right now." Joe started begging, "You're everything to me. Please don't leave." I assured her that there was nothing to be afraid of and that I belonged only to her. Her determination to fix everything in the bedroom was obvious, and I readily accepted it. I may have exaggerated my fears a little, but I liked the way she fixed the situation. It was only a week before the wedding, and I was already getting tired of the constant comments about how lucky I was. Although Mom seemed to agree that Joe was lucky to have me, I wanted her to express her gratitude too. It wasn't the comments themselves that upset me, but the fact that Joe clearly liked them. I wanted her to calm me down or support me a little, but all our conversations seemed to revolve around her and her opinions. Because of this, I felt neglected and underestimated as the big day approached. At first, I attributed her stress to the upcoming wedding, but over time I realized that most of the planning process was too much for me. My offer to arrange a small meeting with loved ones was quickly rejected. The wedding went beyond our initial ideas and financial constraints. We focused on finding the perfect dress, venue, cake, and ring. The guest list continued to grow, including distant relatives whom I had never seen, and the total number of guests reached almost 270 people. In this chaos, it seemed to me that I had been sidelined and forgotten. I often received the latest news about the wedding, but sometimes I was ignored altogether. I was wondering if anyone would notice that I missed the wedding and couldn't help but wonder why she decided to marry me. Despite my doubts, I still attended the wedding, and everything went smoothly, including the speeches. Her father's speech was more like a harsh lesson on how to properly care for his daughter, while her mother looked on approvingly at what was happening. It wasn't exactly the warm welcome I expected from my new family. Joe noticed the expression on my face and came over to stand next to me. "I raise a glass to the connection of our two families through the love that Phil and I share," she said, glaring at her father, then sat back down, clearly feeling his disapproval. The wedding went off without any problems. After the honeymoon, we started our life as a married couple. A year and a half later, Jade was born, our first and ultimately only daughter. In my eyes, she was a complete blessing. Joe struggled with postpartum depression and firmly decided that she would no longer experience the pain of childbirth. That's why she made the decision that Jade would be our one and only child. Although I really wanted to have more children, I refrained from discussing this issue with Joe, knowing that motherhood was difficult for her. I took on most of the childcare responsibilities, doing my best to support Joe. When Jade turned 8, Joe expressed a desire to return to work. Thanks to her father's connections, she got a job at a charity fundraising organization. I did not know that its executive director was Richard Askew. She had been working there for over a year when I was invited to a summer social event with other partners and families. The event had a medieval theme and included games and entertainment to raise money for the charity. Those present were dressed in elaborate masquerade costumes, among which the knights and ladies of the manor were the most popular. Joe had an outfit just right for the mistress of the manor, an embroidered tunic, a velvet headdress, a bowler hat, and a silk veil. The event was filled with various games, including simulated hand-to-hand combat using fake weapons and electronic measuring devices, knocking each other off logs into the water, and archery competitions. Richard won the fencing tournament, and only 4 people turned out to be experienced enough to take part in the riding competition. The participants used foam spears, which turned out to be surprisingly heavy. During the competition, with a few skillful blows, they successfully hit the sensors of the electronic shield. One man was even thrown off his horse, although it seemed that he was about to fall. It was all very exciting and enjoyable. Then, to the delight of the crowd, Richard approached Joe and asked for a souvenir. She took off her veil and attached it to his spear, eliciting applause. That's how the flirting started before my eyes. I felt bad that Joe was spending so much time with her boss, so I intervened. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to hide my concern. Joe just giggled and replied, "I don't know, I like the young knight." I wasn't in the mood for Joe's games. "Come on, Phil, aren't you going to protect your damsel in distress? Will you save her from a young troublemaker with a dubious reputation?" Joe teased. I shook my head. I don't need to do this, and you seem to be enjoying the situation. We're married, and I thought we were devoted to each other. Calm down, it's all a lot of fun, Jo replied, raising her eyebrows. I can't calm down at the sight of you playfully chatting. I was wondering what other pranks you might start at work, I said. With these words, I headed for the exit, hoping she would join me, but I was left alone in the hallway, feeling lost. I turned to a familiar solution, finding a pub. The Farmer's Rest pub caught my attention, and I went inside, taking a seat at the bar. Sipping my first pint of beer, I still felt a little annoyed. Over time, I began to wonder if my initial reaction was too harsh. After all, it was Richard Askew who always stayed in the shadows. I thought about what I would say to Jo when I got home, but it turned out to be unnecessary. Jo was nowhere to be found, and I began to worry about her whereabouts as my text messages went unanswered. She eventually showed up after midnight but remained silent. I made a conscious decision not to ask about her absence. The next day, we exchanged only brief greetings at lunch, talking in hushed tones. Later in the evening, Jo started talking about the need for a serious conversation, which made me laugh. Why are you laughing? She asked. For no reason, I replied. I've just heard those words in stories before. Ignoring my reply, Jo continued, firmly stating that no one, including me, has the right to control her. When she admitted that she had become close to Richard since they started working together, I was stunned. Did you sleep with him? I exclaimed, shocked by her revelation. Please don't disrespect me. We had a history together. He was always interested in me. Did you have intimacy with him before? Please stop hinting at that. I have to admit that there is a mutual attraction between us. Have you been intimate with him before? I repeated. Stop acting so immature. I stared at her in disbelief, unable to find words. You dumped me at a charity event. He was by my side when you weren't there. If you hadn't left, none of this would have happened. I don't believe you, Jo. I believe that you finally got it over with him. One argument, and you're already in bed with him. You're acting like a girl of easy virtue. It's not like that at all. So what is it? Is this love? Are you leaving me for him? No, absolutely not. I love you. Then what is it? Just a one-time oversight? Do you feel remorse? It doesn't mean anything. You have feelings for me, and the fact that you slept with him is a purely physical fact. What kind of ridiculous excuse are you trying to come up with? Please don't react like that. It was a mistake. We had a fight, and I was upset. I'm sorry. Is it okay? No, it's not normal. You behaved like that, but that doesn't justify your actions. So why are you telling me this now? I wanted to be honest and try to build a relationship. Rather, you just wanted to throw it in my face. You're right. In order to settle everything, we need to start with a divorce. You can't leave me. There is no evidence of infidelity. What makes you think I need it? In our country, when a couple no longer wants to be together, they can simply file for divorce. This can be done online without resorting to the services of lawyers. You don't have to prove who did what to whom. The concept of private detectives is alien to me. Fortunately, there are also no alienation of affection laws in our country that could harm your beloved Charity. And let's not forget about Richard and his huge salary. But we're not getting divorced because of that, but because of what you did. Don't even think about it. If you want to see Jade again, my family has enough money to make your life difficult. As it is, I've seen the devastating effects of divorce. Even if I had managed to get joint custody, I would have been left without money and probably would have lived in a cardboard box. My ideas about lawyers were completely wrong. Before I knew it, her father's firm had set up an appointment with Dr. Taylor. What's the matter? It seems that these days people rely on consultants or lawyers to make decisions for them. It's like we can't think for ourselves anymore. And why am I being asked to leave when Jo was having an affair? It wasn't an affair. I need time to sort myself out and figure out what I really want to understand who you really are. Seriously? Isn't the fact that you slept with Richard the most important thing? It doesn't change anything, Mr. Hall. Dr. Taylor's expression briefly changed, a hint of disapproval appeared on his usually calm face. Joe chimed in, it doesn't matter. I want to be with you, but I'm not sure you can handle it. I don't want to spend the next 4 decades apologizing. Have you ever apologized at all? I mean, I've heard the word sorry, but it never seemed sincere. Be an adult. I've already apologized. We need to move forward. I have seen no regret from you, no acceptance of the consequences. You seem to be thinking only of yourself. If you feel regret, it's most likely because you don't meet your own standards and are reputed to be a liar. It seems that you don't care about me, except that you want to control our relationship. You're trying to play the victim because I hurt your pride, but the truth is that your cheating hurt me, including my pride. Besides, it's hard for me to understand that a woman who should put my well-being first practically doesn't care about me. Please, it was just for once, just an affair. I was mad at you. You did it because of something insignificant. It's even more painful. I do not know if it was a one-time thing or if you dated him for several months. How could you do something like that? If you don't believe me, then maybe it's time to get over it and move on, Joe said casually. Wow, this is actually a good idea. This is the first time you've said something reasonable. Wait, are you serious? I got up and got ready to leave. What are you doing? Don't you dare leave me. You still want to control everything, don't you? Well, you can't control me. I have the freedom to leave this room and leave you, philosophy. Phil, please don't leave. Phil. Dr. Taylor tried to contact me when I missed an appointment. When he called, I told him I wasn't coming. He seemed to have anticipated my decision. In a moment of candor, he warned me about some aspects of my wife's personality that I should be wary of. Besides her infidelity, he mentioned her narcissistic traits and her tendency to never forgive me for her actions. He also warned me about parental alienation. The conversation ended abruptly. I was immersed in reading when I came across something that shocked me to the core. The character traits described clearly corresponded to Joe, especially her inflated sense of self-importance and belief in her own superiority. Her inability to empathize, constant need for approval, tendency to criticize others, and unwillingness to accept any form of criticism really stood out. It suddenly dawned on me that I could lose Jade forever. The concept of parental alienation, when one parent psychologically sets the child against the other parent, made me realize that Jade could become an object of manipulation and completely cut off from me. It was simply impossible. The heartbreaking long-term consequences for the child, as well as practical examples, made it clear that none of the breakup or revenge plans were practical. I didn't have the resources, connections, or experience to come out a winner. I was an ordinary person who found myself at the mercy of the legal system. Was there any way to prevent a complete loss? And then it dawned on me. It wasn't exactly an epiphany, but a glimmer of hope. I got the idea to stay with Joe and raise Jade together. She's almost 10 years old now, so it's going to take me about 6 more years. Perhaps love is not a necessary component of a relationship with Joe, nor is loyalty. Marriage can be more favorable for financial stability. If we can maintain a friendly relationship for a while, I can be sure that I won't lose Jade. Dr. Taylor's warning made me think about the consequences of not participating in Jade's life. Joe begged me to give her another chance to explain herself, but I was adamant that I wouldn't do it until she agreed to stop interfering with my visits to Jade after she moved in with my mother. She categorically refused to comply and assured me that there would be no problems with visits. Reluctantly, I returned to our former home to discuss and settle our differences. The truth is, I've always wanted something more in my life. If it wasn't Richard, then sooner or later, it would have been someone else. Why did you decide to marry me? It's clear that I love you, she replied earnestly. You fool. You bring me joy, security, and peace. I excel in social situations and crave attention, and it's all thanks to you. I'm relying on you, but I need something more. And what you need is Richard Askew? Well, not really. He's not bad in bed, but I can end the relationship with him. I know you don't love him. Just know that if you break up with me in the next half hour, he'll already be at the door. He always had feelings for me. It's unbelievable you have so ruthlessly revealed your true feelings. Perhaps you are really made for each other. This shouldn't be the end for us. Please look at me. You won't find anyone who can take better care of you than me. But do you want to have fun with other men? It's not worth talking about it so bluntly. The time I spent with Richard showed me what I was missing. I want to be more open with you, but I'm afraid of losing you. It doesn't have to happen often, and I can control myself. We sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity. The consequences of our divorce weighed on me. Thoughts of them crept into my head, forcing me to reflect on our situation. Finally, I plucked up the courage to speak. I think we will succeed if we are open to finding other relationships, I said uncertainly. Jo's reaction was unexpected. At first, shock showed on her face, but it was quickly replaced by a mischievous smile. Of course, honey. I can be your hot wife if you like. I'm ready for anything you want. You can watch, and I'll tell you all the juicy details. Maybe it will help you understand me, she replied playfully. But my intentions were different. That's not exactly what I meant. I'm thinking more about swapping with other couples, I clarified. Why would you consider this option if you have me by your side? She asked. Perhaps it's my natural inclination for equality. It can also satisfy your desire for intimacy with other men, I said, looking at her slender figure in a fitted skirt. Dear, I don't want to compete for your attention. You only want me, she said. I realized that I had to use her desire to admire and imagine what attractive men she could have fun with. They will crave companionship with a beauty like you. You will be the center of their attention, and they will satisfy your every desire, I said. It dawned on me that she was more attracted to the idea than the need to control me. So I made my last attempt, my last plea. This is the only way to stay a couple, but there are several conditions. You must undergo a medical examination before we get intimate again, and we must always use protection. We will not tolerate any non-consensual behavior. We will register on the site to communicate with other couples who have similar interests. Besides, it's time to end the relationship with Richard and never see him again. I can't stand this guy. Jo was not embarrassed by this and accused me of trying to deceive her, which amused me. I asked if she had already quit her job, and I made it clear to Jo that this was out of the question. Either Richard would leave, or I would, reluctantly. Jo agreed. She noticed my firm determination but was sure she could outsmart me in the end. She also decided to leave, saying that Dad had found her a new job and promising that she would never see Richard again. Although I wasn't completely sure of her sincerity, I expected her to resist even more. I registered on several sites and was surprised by the overwhelming number of responses I received. The vivid image of Jo in a luxurious evening dress attracted people of all ages more than the risque photos in other profiles. We started chatting with several couples online, and the first couple we met in person were Dave and Gail. The meeting was quite decent. They were a little younger than us, in great shape, and quite cute. Dave especially liked Jo, but I didn't like Gail. In the end, we found the meeting just intriguing and decided to move on, much to Jo's regret. At one point, we exchanged quick kisses on the lips. Jo looked embarrassed when I kissed Gail, although her kiss with David was more passionate and prolonged. After that, I paired the couples according to the image of my wife. I didn't really care who Jo ended up with. In truth, most couples were a good match, although not always. Every month or so, we would arrange meetings with other couples, not always for intimate entertainment. As a rule, the men were charming and their spouses were very attractive. We enjoyed meeting a wide variety of people between the ages of 20 and 40, each of whom had a unique appearance and personality. Jo's loyalty no longer bothered me, and I was happy to welcome new acquaintances. These casual acquaintances continued for several years. In everyday life, Jo's behavior improved somewhat, and there were fewer and fewer problems. But we both knew that if she returned to her previous actions, I would leave without hesitation. So, a fragile peace was established between us. Spending more and more time with Jade, a teenager who often quarreled with her mother, I quietly worked in the background to strengthen our relationship. I treasured our bond even more, realizing how fragile it was. It would be much more expensive to let her go. If we broke up, I wouldn't be able to afford my own apartment. Besides, I'd have to do the housework and pay Joe alimony for sleeping with Richard. Also, I had entered into intimate relationships with several beautiful women that I would never have thought possible, although I had always hoped for a faithful and monogamous relationship. At that time, this arrangement seemed to me the most practical. My feelings for Joe had changed, and I no longer loved her the way I used to, but our relationship remained quite satisfactory. However, I couldn't help but yearn for the deep connection I once had with Joe. Jade was already 13 years old, and I realized that I just needed to get through a few more years. I started a conversation with a couple who had been married for 30 years, named Megan and Ian. Our conversation was easy and pleasant, and we even exchanged a few photos in our outfits. Megan was charming with curly red hair, and Ian looked pretty athletic. Despite my initial assumptions, Ian was friendly and sociable, and Megan was a bit reserved and perhaps shy. They didn't fit the stereotypical image I had imagined. We decided to meet at a restaurant and see what would happen. Joe tried to impress by wearing a form-fitting black dress that accentuated her curves. I was taken aback by her bold choice of outfit, thinking that it might be too revealing, but she assured me that she wanted to look stylish. She had to wear high-heeled shoes because Ian was quite tall. When we entered the elite bar, they greeted us with warm smiles, exchanged greetings, and friendly hugs as if they were long-lost friends. Ian was wearing a formal suit that resembled my clothes. Seeing Megan firsthand was just as exciting. The photos we saw did not convey her beauty. She was wearing a stunning midnight blue dress that seemed to sparkle in the soft light of the streetlights, paired with modest heeled shoes. Her fiery red hair was styled in a cascade of curls and pins that looked very natural. Maybe Joe hadn't made a mistake with her outfit. There were a lot of smiles and mutual comments, confirming that we were glad to finally meet. We had small talk about how we found this place and then decided to order a couple of bottles of wine. Trying my best not to look at Megan, I couldn't help but notice Ian's open gaze in Joe's direction. The conversation continued, and we all admitted that we had been busy thinking about each other all week. It's amazing how smoothly everything has worked out for us. It's much simpler than I thought, as if we've been friends for a long time. We definitely don't need any extra tension, I said, and the rest of the group nodded in agreement with my statement. I noticed that Joe was watching Ian closely. Despite her initial hesitation, she seemed to be charmed by him and quickly went into full flirtation mode. Megan was nervously biting her lip, drawing my gaze to her full lips. There was a dance floor between the bar and the restaurant where music was playing. I asked Megan to dance, and after getting Ian's consent, she smiled. Ian stood up too and held out his hand to Joe. She accepted the offer with a smile, not bothering to look me in the eye. I distinctly remembered the first time Megan took my hand and our eyes met. My heart started pounding. I gently put my arm around her waist. "Are you okay?" I asked. Megan just grinned and nodded, swaying with me to the beat of the music. Sensing her nervousness, I tried to ease the tension. "I have to say, your dress is amazing, very elegant." "Thank you very much. I really put a lot of thought into choosing this outfit." "I wanted to look attractive but not too overt," Megan replied. "I'm glad you did," I said. Megan shared with me that they met for the first time. Their interest in something like this flared up after a night of chatting with college friends and heavy drinking, which almost led to an affair, but they decided not to continue. Ian couldn't wait to test himself, and he managed to persuade Megan to join him in this endeavor. I had a feeling that there was some deep meaning in all this, but I didn't want to push it too hard or too early. "Would you mind if I brought you closer to me, Megan?" I asked. "No, not at all. You can call me Meg like everyone else," she replied. "Okay, why don't you put your hands on my shoulders?" I suggested. When she agreed, I gently wrapped my arms around her slender waist. "What do you think?" I asked. "It's my pleasure, philosophy." "I like being around you," Meg replied. I bit my lip nervously, not knowing what to do next. "Let's just take a deep breath, Meg. I promise I won't do anything to make you feel uncomfortable, and if I do, just let me know, and we'll figure it out together," I reassured her. Meg smiled gratefully. "Thanks, philosophy." I really want to trust you, and I think this is a good start for something special. Hugging Meg, I forgot about Joe and Ian for a moment. At that moment, I wanted to kiss her, but I restrained myself, deciding that it was too early. I was hoping that this was something worth waiting for in the future. Looking at each other, we noticed Ian and Joe exchanging kisses. His arms were a little lower than before, but I was surprisingly indifferent. Since she betrayed me, my feelings for her have irrevocably changed. Her dismissive attitude only reinforced my belief that reconciliation is impossible. Meg looked up at me and asked, "How do you feel watching them kiss?" I expected to feel jealous, but instead, I realized it was because you were in my arms, I replied. Meg smiled softly. All week, I realized that I liked you, but I was afraid that my jealousy would get out of control. Surprisingly, this did not happen. Our date is going on as usual, but with an additional element of excitement. It's exciting, but in a good way. I don't mind worrying, especially when we're together. I pulled her closer, enjoying the closeness, and my hands gently moved to the back of her thighs, avoiding inappropriate touches and feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Ian and Joe came up to us and asked, "Are you two okay?" I motioned for Meg to answer. "Yes, we're fine," she replied. "You're a great couple," Ian praised us, and I couldn't help but feel proud. There was something about being called a couple that I really liked. Meg turned to me and nodded in agreement. "I think so too," she said. We resumed our seats in the booth while Ian and Joe continued to dance. Leaning over to chat with Meg over the music, our faces suddenly became closer. She bent down and pressed her lips to mine in a gentle kiss. Her soft lips and intoxicating perfume caused a wave of electricity in me, reminding me of my first school kiss, exciting and nervous. Meg let out a soft moan as I tightened the kiss, completely lost in the moment. Her gentle responses ignited my passion, drawing her closer to me, and I became more and more immersed in the sensations. Unable to resist, I opened my mouth to taste her sweetness, feeling the heat between us increase. When we finally parted, I sighed softly, trying to catch my breath. Her breasts pressed against my chest, and I felt tension all over my body. "Wow, this is really something special," I whispered gratefully. "Thank you," she smiled and reassured me. "There is no need to hurry. We can walk at a pace that is convenient for you. We don't have to follow anyone's instructions." Nodding in agreement, I replied, "No, let's just do it our way." We looked at each other and noticed that Joe was watching us, and Ian let out a quiet wow. Meg blushed and buried her face in my chest, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and happiness. Ian and Joe sat down at the table, and we immersed ourselves in a conversation about friends, family, travel, and work. Time passed quickly, and it became clear that we had become very attached to each other and had a lot in common. Ian broke the silence by offering to spend the evening at their house or postpone it if needed. Joe's excitement became palpable when Ian suggested, "Why don't we switch partners for the duration of the trip so that no one gets lost?" Meg nodded in agreement, nervously biting her lip. "Why don't we go back and see how it goes without promises?" she suggested cautiously. "Yes, that's fair enough. Any of us can stop at any moment," I reassured her. Grinning, Joe added, "Sure, sounds like a good plan." I offered Meg my arm. She took it, and I led her out of the bar, feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety bubbling in my stomach. Joe and Ian walked behind us, their arms intertwined. The waitress was watching us, raising an eyebrow and smiling. Climbing into the car, I bent down to kiss Meg, not knowing whether to touch her cheek or her lips. To my delight, she turned around and kissed me gently on the lips. Starting the engine, we drove away, noticing that Ian was driving behind us. "Did you enjoy your evening, Meg?" I asked. "Yes, everything was great," she replied. "It was calmer than I expected, but that doesn't mean I'm still not excited. I would advise you not to worry, but to tell the truth, I'm a little nervous myself. You were very charming, and I really enjoy spending time with you. Just don't forget to keep everything under control." She giggled and reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I appreciate it, thank you," she said with a smile. "Everything seems so easy with you." At first, I was doubtful. By the way, it seems to me that Ian and Joe get along well too. After a short car ride, we got to their house and gathered at the bar to drink some wine, then settled down in a cozy living room. I was happy when Meg decided to sit next to me. We struck up a conversation during which I couldn't help but admire Meg's amazing figure. Looking around the room, I noticed Ian's hand on Joe's hip, which led to their kiss. Inspired by their actions, I also bent down to kiss Meg. Soon after, Ian and Joe headed for the exit, leaving me with a sudden desire to spend more time with Meg. We decided to meet for breakfast at 9 o'clock the next morning. It would be not only intimacy but also an overnight stay. The thought of spending the night with Meg filled me with excitement and anticipation. Meg nodded in agreement, and I continued to kiss her passionately. But as the tension mounted, she suddenly pulled away, expressing fears about what was about to happen. I assured her that her comfort and consent were my top priorities. At that moment, we heard the bed creak upstairs, signaling what was happening in the room. Meg took a deep breath, got to her feet, took my hand, and led me up the stairs. The sound of the headboard hitting the wall in the next room brought us out of our slumber. It was obvious that Ian and Joe were having fun. As soon as the awkwardness passed, breakfast turned into a casual conversation. We shared our thoughts without going into details. Joe and Ian seemed pleased too, and we decided to set up another meeting in 6 months. Ian and Meg were constantly present in our lives, and I treasured every moment I spent with them. Joe started teasing me about my feelings for Meg, but I dismissed it as a passing joke. Everything changed when Ian expressed concern that Meg and I had become too close and decided to end our meetings. At that moment, I could no longer deny the truth. I had feelings for Meg. I realized that I was in love, and the thought of being with her consumed me. Unfortunately, our time together had come to an end, and it had been 4 months since we last saw each other. For no reason at all, Joe broke the news to me. Ian and Meg invited us to a party, more precisely to a party hosted by a couple they met on the site. Not knowing how it would go, they wanted familiar faces to join them in case things went awry. Although we were not big fans of such parties, we decided that we would only participate in the exchange of couples, no singles or groups. Despite my doubts, I was intrigued to see Meg again, so I reluctantly agreed to participate. Joe, on the other hand, seemed genuinely curious about what was going on at these parties and was eager to experience it for herself. I was pleasantly surprised when we arrived at the party venue, a spacious and secluded private house. The atmosphere at the party was relaxed, drinks flowed freely, and there were friendly acquaintances around. The host made sure to introduce us to some of the regulars, who turned out to be nice people, although I didn't notice Ian or Megan anywhere. Joe struck up a conversation with a charming young man named Jeff, who was not only attractive but also seemed to care about her. They approached the bar, and I struck up a conversation with the hosts, who then introduced me to another couple. About half an hour later, Joe returned and said she was going upstairs to spend more time with Jeff. I quickly reminded her that we had agreed to communicate only with other couples since Jeff was not married. Despite the fact that it was a specific party, I firmly stated that we would not retreat from our boundaries. I realized she was annoyed and wondered if she should just leave, but my thoughts were interrupted when I noticed how she barely noticeably shook her head in the direction of her possible lover on the other side of the room. When Ian and Meg finally appeared, she seemed to calm down a bit. It was hard not to notice Meg in a dress that was more revealing than her usual style, short and with a revealing neckline. She looked amazing, but it was obvious that she was uncomfortable. Ian was active as usual, and Meg looked distant and restless. I decided that this party would not be fun for any of us. It didn't take long for Ian to guide Joe back to the bar. We talked, but she seemed distracted. The atmosphere was tense without the warmth that had been between us before. I offered to take a ride in the car to get some fresh air without pressure. A visible sense of relief appeared on her face, and then she began to cry. Trying to comfort her, I asked her what was bothering her. She confided to me that Ian wanted her to make love with several partners at once, and she was not satisfied with that. Ian insisted that we come to the party, but I was hesitant until he mentioned that you would be there. I knew you wouldn't want me to do something that I didn't like, Meg continued. It suddenly dawned on us that Ian might have something planned for Joe. They talked and made plans. We looked for them at the bar, but they were nowhere to be found. I looked at my watch and noticed that it had been over 45 minutes since they left together. I hurried up the stairs and was already heading for the hall when Jo rushed out of the bedroom, struggling into her dress and almost colliding with me. The door was ajar, and Ian and Jeff were inside. Despite her embarrassment, she at least had the decency to look ashamed. I stared at her, feeling a surge of anger. "This is my body, and I have the right to do whatever I want with it," Jo said firmly. "I'm leaving here without any questions," I said. My heels clicked behind me as I descended the stairs and crossed the tiled hallway. I thought it was Jo and was about to speak when I suddenly saw that it was Meg. "Can I come with you?" she asked, looking at me with her eyes wide with fear. As I reached the landing, I noticed the third man following the other two towards Jo's bedroom. I nodded to Meg and headed for the exit. The trip went off without incident. We chatted about our plans and agreed that Ian and Jo were narcissistic upstarts. I thought Jo was always striving to win and would not compromise in our relationship, while Meg's opinion of Ian was more straightforward. He was just an. I laughed at her assessment, believing that this was an accurate analysis of their characters, which I could easily relate to what I had managed to overcome without the help of a psychologist. "Do you mind if I give you a ride home? I'm not in the mood for company right now. If you can give me a ride to my mom's, I will be grateful to you. I wouldn't want to see Ian anytime soon." I said goodbye to her and headed back home, feeling the weight of silence and darkness. The next day, Jo returned home. I didn't know what she was going to tell me, so I interrupted her before she could say anything. "Don't worry, Jo, it's over between us. Why make a big deal out of a molehill? We have already been with many people. What's wrong with adding a few more to this list? 3 guys in one night is already enough for me, but it seems to me that you always strive for more. And let's be honest, you're a godsend. A lot of guys would jump at the chance to be with you. You did it, congratulations." She couldn't help but grin. "So, have you ever been left unprotected? Just answer honestly." "This is the first time for me. I apologize for being upset when you interrupted my time with Jeff." "That's not true. You and Ian planned everything, used Meg to distract me while you both got your way. Everything's a game with you, you always want more like a spoiled child. Maybe you should go to the clinic for a checkup. I can't continue this relationship." After that, Jo didn't take my departure very well. She started stalking me and wouldn't let me see Jade. She even tried to force her way into my parents' house, accusing me of mistreating her. I asked her to leave without using physical force. Fortunately, Mom couldn't help herself. She slapped her and physically dragged her away, saying, "Jo, you need help. I'm not sure if you're okay." This remark provoked another round of verbal abuse from Jo. I gave Jo money for Jade, but she redirected me to an alimony agency. I couldn't help but laugh when I was informed that I actually had to pay her less. Her anger escalated to such an extent that she began to threaten the administrator, and she was warned by the police. I drove up to Jade's house, but Jo informed me that she was at a friend's house. To my surprise, Richard ASU came out of the living room at that moment, seemingly unabashed. I couldn't believe it. As I suspected, Richard had already caused problems. I stared at him intently, determined to deal with him, when I remembered Dr. Taylor's warnings from the past. A thought struck me, maybe this is all a trick, a scheme to frame me. Jo's competitive nature made her avoid defeats. I realized that I could be accused of assault if that happened. Jo would have seized control of Jade and everything else. Jo kept saying that Richard would be a great father to Jade and would love to adopt her. Then I noticed her phone discreetly placed on a shelf, probably recording our conversation. I burst out laughing almost hysterically. "Oh Jo, nice try, but I won't lay a finger on your lover. You have a very peculiar character, and you really should be together. By the way, does Richard know about your antics with multiple partners and without protection?" Richard was shocked. As I was leaving, I casually mentioned that it would be nice to visit the clinic and check my health. For a long time, I received a barrage of abusive messages and videos from her. It was strange to me that she was wasting her time on me when she was supposedly fine. I didn't care about her actions anymore as long as Jade was safe. One day, during a phone conversation, I suggested that she give Jade to me. Then she would have more freedom to pursue other interests. I also mentioned that I had heard about Richard's move, so she would have more space now. After my words, she abruptly ended the conversation, probably shocked that two men had already refused her. The divorce was an inexorable horror. It seemed like it would last forever. She refused to give up, making false accusations that I was cheating and abusing alcohol. She had no evidence, and some of it was so outrageous that even the family court social workers and lawyers began to see through her lies. Anyone who dared to question her words received a barrage of insults. It became clear to me that the woman I thought I knew as Joanna was just a puppet for her manipulations. Even Joanna's own parents began to worry about their daughter's erratic behavior. I also take responsibility for the situation because I was the one who abandoned her. In the first moment, Jade found herself in a difficult situation at the age of 14, but the family court took into account her wishes, and she expressed a desire to stay with me. I took on most of the parenting responsibilities, not missing a single event, class, or parent-teacher meeting, and even became her personal chauffeur. Joe took this decision as a betrayal, wondering how anyone could not choose her in such a situation. During the custody hearing, she was furious when my lawyer demanded a psychological evaluation of Joe to protect Jade's well-being. I was scared of Joe's reaction. She started swearing in court, losing control of her composure. She thought I was a villain, just like my lawyer. Although she may have been right, my lawyer ended up on my side. Her behavior led to another charge of contempt of court. When she deprived me of the opportunity to communicate with Jade, I diligently documented and saved all the messages she sent me to use as evidence in court. The judge strictly warned her that in case of further violations, she would be taken into custody. During the last hearing, she lost her temper again when the judge allowed joint custody, insulting him as an ignorant old man. She was subsequently charged and fined for her outburst. Over time, I began to spend more and more time with my daughter as Joe seemed to lose interest in both raising her and solving problems related to Jade's inappropriate behavior. All I had to do was pay off the mortgage, after which we could sell the house or Joe would have to buy my part. Besides, I had been saving small amounts for a long time, and it was good. The day after the divorce was finalized, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw an amazing red-haired girl. "Hi. I suppose you want to pair up with someone who was recently divorced, turned upside down, and thinks only of one thing, to find a devoted and faithful partner with whom you can build a life. I think you found a candidate who fits that description if that's what you're interested in." I had really kept in touch with Meg, and we leaned on each other during our divorces. Ian seemed to follow in Joe's footsteps, apologizing occasionally and then going back to his old ways. After that, I rarely saw Joe, only once on Jade's 16th birthday. I was hoping for a polite conversation with you after our long separation, philosophy. I could even come back to you if you begged me to. Deep down, you know that I was the best thing that ever happened in your life. Don't try to deny that you miss me. Turning to leave, I answered her, "You're absolutely right. It's pointless to argue with you." After a while, I met her at the train station when I was sending Jade to university. Meg was next to me, and we watched the train leave. In a moment of impudence, Joe whispered to her, "I could easily take him away from you if I wanted to, but I have feelings for other men that I like too much, and his ego has a hard time putting up with it." Meg's sweet smile did not leave her face as she said softly, "My dear, it looks like you've become completely embittered and detached from reality." Taking my hand, she carefully guided us to the exit. Jade always came back to us on holidays, in love with her stepbrother, and we found our happiness together. Joe continued to have fun with different men, and eventually, her parents realized that she had mental problems and sent her to a psychiatric center for treatment after she began treatment for syphilis.